Hi guys, this is Mrs. Foy, and this is the screencast on the excretory system, which is also called the urinary system. And the urinary system's main organ are the kidneys. We have two bean-shaped kidneys on our back, close to our back, protected actually by a layer of fat. You can see the adrenal gland sitting on top here. And then the kidneys produce urine, and they also maintain homeostasis in our blood. It basically filters blood and takes stuff out that we don't want in the body and then puts stuff back into the blood that we want to make sure we keep. So anything that stays in the urine is going to go into these two tubes called ureters, which take it to a circular bladder, a spherical bladder that holds the urine, and then there's a sphincter here at the end of the urethra that we can release when we urinate. So kidneys, as I said, are important for eliminating something called nitrogenous waste, which is waste when we digest proteins, among other things, and also to balance certain minerals and water in our bodies. So we can see where our kidneys are in our kind of back behind our rib cage just a little bit, and they sit mostly in the pelvic cavity. So if we look at a kidney and take a cross section of it and blow it up, we can see that there's kind of an actual outer core that we call the cortex. And then we can see that the tissue inside the kidney looks a little bit different, and that's called the medulla. And then we have almost something that looks like a funnel that's called the pelvis of the kidney, and that's where urine drains into the pelvis and then into the ureter and is taken out of our body. And we can see the structure we're going to talk more about called the nephron that kind of starts up in the cortex and loops down into the medulla, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The circulatory system that goes to the kidney is the renal artery and the renal vein. The renal artery supplies oxygenated blood to the kidney and brings blood to the kidney to be filtered. And then the blood leaving the kidney is the renal vein. So the renal artery is going to be a branch of the descending aorta, and the renal vein is going to go into the inferior vena cava and go back up to the heart. So we just talked about the cortex, medulla, and the pelvis. So if we talk about the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. And here in this picture, I can see that the nephron is basically made of a blood vessel, kind of a tangle of a blood vessel here in red. And it's made of kind of a cap structure that is called Bowman's capsule. This is actually like a little collecting cup. And everything in blue is a tubule that is going to process the urine, and over here, the urine is going to collect. So basically, the process of making urine is a process of filtration, and then anything that stays in this blue tube is going to end up in the urine, and anything that stays in the blood is going to stay in our body. And we can see that this part of the nephron is in the cortex, but some of these loopy tubes end up in the medulla. So blood is going to be filtered in the nephrons, and there are 1 million nephrons in each kidney, and they filter a whole lot of blood for us and keep toxic things out of our body. So we can see that a nephron, so here is an actual picture, that other was a cartoon, and I've got blood coming in, and it gets filtered, and then the blood goes out, and the stuff that gets filtered gets caught in this little cap thing here, and then it goes into this tubule and down this long tubule and through this long tubule and then out. And so that we can see that this ball of blood vessels is called the glomerulus. And the glomerulus is a kind of a tangled ball of blood vessels where the blood filters out the materials, a lot of which are waste. And then some things are going to stay in this tube, and then other things are going to be removed from that tube. So we've got our unfiltered blood coming in, and it is going to branch down into smaller and smaller blood vessels. Eventually, one of those blood vessels is going to move into these millions of little glomeruli and get filtered. And then these tubules are the things that make the urine, and the urine filters just like creeks coming into a bigger river and then going into a big stream right here of urine out into the ureter. So that's the basic of how it works. So the names of the nephron are important to know. And so we have already talked about the glomerulus. The glomerulus is a blood vessel where filtration goes. And you can even almost see the structure and function here, right? I can tell that this is going to be, there's going to be some things filtered out of here. And this Bowman's capsule is like a little cup that catches what we call the filtrate, the stuff that gets filtered out. And so the filtrate is going to move through what we call the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal means close to the glomerulus here. Convoluted means twisted. So we got the proximal convoluted tubule, and then this long thing called the loop of Henle, which dips from the cortex down into the medulla. And then we go to the distal convoluted tubule. Distal means farther away, convoluted means twisty. And then the tubules come into the collecting duct. So you would have a neighboring nephron here that might also have its distal convoluted tubule coming into this collecting duct. And the collecting ducts then are going to merge together in the pelvis of the kidney, and then all that urine goes into the ureters. We can see, though, that part of this blood vessel, so we have an afferent arteriole coming in here. What is happening here is the blood vessel is following along the tubule, and that is going to set up a situation where I'm going to have materials pass from the blood to the tubule and also pass from the tubule back into the blood. So your kidney is very important about keeping a homeostasis about materials that stay in our body, that stay in our blood. So we've already talked about the 6 different parts of the nephron. That's important to know those. And we've already described to you what those look like, and so you've got this. So now we can take a look again at the nephron. So we've got blood coming in from the afferent renal artery, and it goes into the glomerulus. And in the glomerulus, filtration occurs. And so a lot of things, including a lot of water, are going to filter out of the glomerulus into Bowman's capsule. Bowman's capsule is the little bowl that catches the filtrate. And then the filtrate is going to go into the proximal convoluted tubule. But in this place, we're going to have some times that the materials in the filtrate are going to be reabsorbed back into the blood. And especially in this loop of Henle, a lot of water is going to be moved from the filtrate back into the blood vessels. And so then we go into the distal convoluted tubule. By this time, it's kind of like the last chance. Is there anything in the tubule that the body wants to make sure it saves in the blood? And is there anything in the blood that was maybe too big to be filtered out that's going to get into the urine? So let's talk a little bit more about that in general. So guys, there are basically 3 major parts of how urine is formed. There is filtration, and there is reabsorption, and there is secretion. Okay, so in filtration is exactly what it sounds. It's materials that filter from the glomerulus, from the capillaries, that ball of capillaries. And smaller things in water can just go right out into the tubule, the head of which is Bowman's capsule. And so at that point, that's filtration. That happens first. Then we have reabsorption. So there are going to be some things, the most important of which is water, that got through our filter here that we don't want to pee out. Anything that stays in this yellow tubule, it's yellow for a reason, is going to be urine. And so there's going to be some things the body is going to reabsorb back into the peritubular capillaries. And that's a good thing, because if we peed out all of the water that we filtered out, we would dehydrate and die very quickly. Then the third phase is called secretion. So can you imagine that there might be some things in the blood that would be too big to filter through, but that the body would want to get rid of. And so the body uses active transport and some energy here to put some bigger things from the blood that didn't get filtered out into the tubule to be secreted. And excretion is what we call urine, when we remove urine from our bodies. So in our reabsorption, in our filtration, I guess I'll go back to this. In our filtration, we're going to have blood pressure that is going to be pushing water and some tiny particles from the glomerulus into Bowman's capsule, and we call that filtrate. The blood cells and some big proteins and some other things are not going to get through there. They're going to remain in the blood. And so we now call this filtrate that goes into the proximal convoluted tubule or proximal tubule. So now in the proximal convoluted tubule, we've got reabsorption. The reabsorption is taking back most of the water, 99% of the water, back into the blood. Also, glucose, because that's a fuel, right, for our cells. That goes back into our blood vessel. Amino acids, which we need, and some salts go back into our blood vessels. So we have things moving back and forth. The water's moving with osmosis, diffusion, some small things that are going from high to low concentration, and then we have to use some ATPs to move bigger things back into the blood. The loop of Henle, that big long loop that we saw, is mostly where water gets back into the blood. And the way that water moves is the kidneys actually pump sodium, and because water follows salt, water is going to move by osmosis then, because the kidneys pump sodium so that water can go back into the blood. And the reason why the water doesn't go where it's not supposed to is there's certain parts of the loop of Henle and the tubule that are not permeable to water. And so water is corralled back into the blood the way that the body wants it to be. In the distal tubule, or the distal convoluted tubule, this is where the kidney is going to put big proteins and molecules that didn't get filtered out, but that the body wants to get rid of, into the urine. And so certain drugs like penicillin, another waste product called creatinine, are too big to actually filter through, and so the body uses ATP to get those into the filtrate and go into the urine. So just to kind of recap the process of making urine, here we go. So we have the glomerulus here, Bowman's capsule, filtration is occurring here. That's the first step of making urine. And then we've got reabsorption. So every place that you see a green arrow, this is material that's going from the filtrate back into the blood. So we have transport of things that the body wants to retain in the blood, and water is the most important of these. The loop of Henle is the major place where water reabsorption occurs. And then we have the opposite of reabsorption. We have secretion. So here I have secretion. I have a little bit of secretion going on here, but the major part of secretion is going on in the distal tubule and the collecting duct, where I have secretion of bigger molecules from the blood into the tubule to get rid of them, and that would be things like drug metabolites and things like that. So homeostasis, creating a balance, maintaining a balance. The kidneys are one of our major homeostatic organs because it's going to control what leaves the body and what stays in the body in this process of producing urine. So at any given time, about 20% of human blood is in our kidneys. Humans have 2 kidneys. We can only function with one, and so you have a lot of heroic people that donate a kidney to people that have kidney failure, and they live just fine with one kidney. So 3 of the basic waste products that our cells produce that we want to get out of the body because they are poisonous to our body is urea. So urea is a nitrogenous waste that our liver produces when we break down protein, and that's the major component of our urine. We have uric acid, which is a breakdown of DNA and RNA when our bodies break down DNA and RNA. And then we have creatinine, which is a waste product when our muscles work. And so those 3 waste products are the major waste products in our urine. But our kidneys do a lot of other things. They control the pH of our blood and our bodies. They secrete some hormones. They activate a hormone called erythropoietin, which is going to stimulate red blood cell production, and they activate vitamin D in our skin. And so our kidneys are really important. And so a lot of times when you're not feeling well and the doctor's trying to figure out why, they'll order a urinalysis because there's a lot of that you can tell from a urinalysis. So many of us have had the unfortunate experience of suffering through a UTI, or a urinary tract infection. So there are basically two places where infection can occur. Infection can occur in the actual bladder, so you can get infections from bacteria in bladder, and we call that cystitis. And we can also get infections in our actual kidneys. And so those can be treated with antibiotics, but a person with a UTI infection should be drinking a lot of water to basically help to flush those toxins out through the body. Sometimes people suffer with very painful condition called kidney stones. And kidney stones can vary in size, but the tubes leading from the kidney to the ureter and then into the bladder and out the urethra are very small. And so sometimes little mineral salts can form, and there's some people have genetic tendencies towards this. Some people don't drink enough water and these form, and they are very painful. And if they're very large, sometimes doctors can use ultrasounds to break them up into smaller pieces, but sometimes they have to pass. And when they pass through, that can be very painful for the person. The last problem I want to talk about with the kidneys are diabetics. So a normal person is going to, that has our insulin working correctly, is going to have a normal amount of blood glucose. And so that glucose, of course, filters through because it's a small molecule relatively, and then we have to reabsorb it back into our blood. But somebody who has diabetes doesn't have their blood glucose level is too high, hyperglycemic, because they don't have enough insulin to be able to transfer that glucose into the cells. And so too much glucose comes through here. And so what happens is there's just too much glucose to be reabsorbed. And so we end up getting glucose in the urine, which is one of the major symptoms of diabetes. So I hope that's been helpful to you and about the excretory system, and I will see you in class.